honoring the spirit and the body, beginning on page 120. 120. We'll read this together. Blessed are you, Holy One, who has formed the human body with wisdom, an intricate network of channels, vessels, and openings. This wondrous structure and the flow of life within us allows us to serve you and give thanks. Let us cherish this gift of flesh and blood, honor it as God's creation. Baruch atah Adonai, rofei chol basar umafli la'asot. We praise you, Holy One, for wondrous acts of creation and healing. A blessing for the soul. Baruch atah Adonai asher b'yado nefesh kol chai v'ruach kol basar ish. We give you praise, Adonai. All life is in your hand, and in your care, the soul of every human being. Continue with Psukei de Zimra, the verses of praise and song on page 130.
Baruch She'amar Ha'olam, Baruch Hu, Baruch Oseh Bereishit, Baruch Omer Ve'oseh, Baruch Oseh Umkayem, Baruch Merachem al Haaretz, Baruch Merachem al Habriot, Baruch Mishalem Sachar Tov Lireah Yachid Chei Ha'olamim Melech Meshubach U'Va'ar Adei Shemo HaGadol Baruch Atah Adonai Melech Me'olam B'Tishbachot.
Page 132, happy are those who dwell in your house, God. They shall sing your praises forever.
Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Oria Hallelujah Oria Hallelujah Ashrei Yoshvei Beitecha Oria Hallelujah Oria Hallelujah Ashrei Yoshvei
God and I collaborate on revising a poem of myself. I decide what needs polishing, what to preserve and what to lose. God reads my draft with pursed lips. If I really mean it, God sings a new song, one strong as stone and serene as silk. I want this year's poem, this year's Ashrei, to be joyful. I want this year's poem to be measured like flour, to burn like sweet, dry maple. I want every reader to come away more certain that transformation is possible. I'd like holiness to fill my words in empty spaces. On Rosh Hashanah it is written, and on Yom Kippur it is sealed. Who will be a haiku and who a sonnet? Who needs meter and who free verse? Who an epic and who a single syllable? If I only get one sound, may it be yes, may I be one. As we enter into Shacharit, we prepare to stand together, counted, our strong, small, and mighty minyan here in person, and our strong minyan on Zoom, all of us together. Page 142, we rise for Baruch Hu. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, yotzer or uvorei choshech, oseh shalom uvorei et hakol, or olam ba'otzar chayim, orot ofel amar vayehi. Source of blessings, our eternal God, your power fills the cosmos, shaping light, creating darkness, making peace and fashioning all things. Infinite light is preserved in light's treasure house. Light from the darkness, said God, and it was so. Or chadash al Tzion ta'ir v'nizkechu lanu mehera le'oro, Baruch atah Adonai yotzer ha'meorot. Our praise to you, Adonai, creator of the cosmic lights. Continue on page 147. I am the blossom pressed in a book, found again after 200 years. I am the maker, the lover, the keeper. When the young girl who starves sits down to a table, she will sit beside me. I am food on the prisoner's plate. I am water rushed to the wellhead, filling the pitcher until it spills. I am the patient gardener of the dry and weedy garden. I am the stone step, the latch, the working hinge. I am the heart contracted by joy, the longest hair white before the rest. I am there in the basket of fruit presented to the widow. I am the musk rose opening unattended, the fern and the boggy summit. I am the one whose love overcomes you, already with you when you think to call my name. On the reverse page, page 146, enlighten our eyes, God, v'ha'er einenu b'toratecha. Show us light through your Torah and cause us to cleave to you and your mitzvot, v'ha'er einenu.
Meharnenu betoratecha v'dabek libeinu b'mitzvotecha v'yachei levaveinu v'yachei yavira et shemecha v'lo nevot
Baruch atah Adonai habocher be'amo Yisrael ba'ahava. Our praise to you, Adonai. You have singled out your people Israel with love. Shema, page 150.
Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Baruch Shem Kipar Mahotah Le'olam.
Please be seated. Continue with Ve'ahavta on page 152.
Ve'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol levacha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'otecha ve'hayu advarim ha'ele asher anochi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha Vishinantam livanecha, v'dibarta b'am, v'shivtecha v'beitecha, uv'lavtecha v'derech, uv'shokbecha v'kumecha, uv'kshartam leot ayadecha, v'hayu letotefot b'einecha, uv'chtavtam al mezuzot beitecha u'visharecha leman tizkeru va'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'yitem kedoshim le'elohechem ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim Liot lachem ve'elohim ani Adonai Elohechem Adonai Elohechem Amen.
Page 161, we'll read together at the top of the page. The beginning of your word is truth. If you exist at all, I know you can't abide hypocrisy. And most of all, you don't want prayers that lie. You'd rather get an honest fight than strings of empty platitudes. So I can't pretend or hide in pious phrases given to me by the past. It's hard to speak my own imperfect truth. In fact, the more I say, the less I seem to know. And the farther away I get from you, whatever you might be. I've heard that what you really want is not more words. You want the heart. That might be more than I can give, but I can try. Even though Judaism is a religion of words, Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, alav hashalom, taught that whenever the language of Judaism aspires into the spiritual realm, it has no choice but to break into song. And the words themselves, it's as though they escape the gravitational pull of finite meaning. And there is something about music that intimates a reality behind our grasp. Words, he says, are the language of the mind, but music is the language of the soul. We continue on page 164 with Mi Chamocha.
Mi chamocha b'elim Adonai, mi chamocha ne'emar b'kodesh, nor b'tehillah osei halam.
Why do we ask God for things when we pray? Do we imagine that if we did not ask, God would not know what we desire? Do we suppose that God has not intended to grant us a certain gift, but seeing how earnest we are, how deeply we pray, that God's mind might be changed? Perhaps God is simply flattered by the effusion of praise. An analogy explains. Imagine a man sitting on his boat on a lake, pulling himself by means of a rope slowly back to shore. But to somebody who is standing far off in the distance, it might appear that he is moving the shore closer to him. Of course, it is only the boat that moves. Similarly, people sometimes think they are moving God when we are really moving ourselves. We are the boats and God is the shore. God does not need our flattery, but we need reminders of God's greatness. God does not change in response to our prayers, but perhaps we do. God remains unfathomable, but with each earnest prayer, we come to understand ourselves a bit better. With each pull, with each tug of that rope, we draw one step closer to God. And if our prayer draws us closer to God, then in some sense, the prayer has been answered. I invite you to rise for the Amidah on page 166.
Adonai, Sepatai Tiftach, Ufi Agita Hilatecha. Adonai, open my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu, ve'imotenu, Elohei Avraham, Elohei Yitzchak,
Hu Baruch Shemo.
Magid Abraham, Bezrat Sarah. Amen. Batagi bor, le'olam Adonai, Mechayei Hakota, Rav Le'oshia, Mechalel Chaim Bechesed, Mechayei Hakol Berachamim Rabim, Samek Naflim B'Rochecholim, U'Matir Asurim, Am Kayem Amonato, Lishenei Apar.
Please be seated. Share this brief reflection from Rabbi Dr. Aaron Pankin, Alav HaShalom, who was the president of the Hebrew Union College Jewish Institute of Religion, and Susan's and my teacher and friend, a great scholar whose life ended very tragically and too soon. He says, our actions help us to live in such a way that when we suffer life's darkest trepidations and depressions, we will always have ways of coping with them. Our actions may not change the ultimate outcome one iota, but they alter our attitude, bolster our ability to withstand challenges, help us handle unavoidable misfortunes better, and see life's value amid chaos and dismay. Sometimes there is no escaping chaos and dismay. There is no escaping heartbreak and even death. But there are ways that we can gain strength together, that we can transcend our circumstances together. Through tefillah, teshuvah, and tzedakah, through self-reflection, through return, and through generosity in these days, we realize that the harshness of life can be made a little less harsh by our words, by our deeds, and by our relationships with one another. Page 174. Let us proclaim the power of this day, a day whose holiness awakens deepest awe and inspires highest praise for your dominion. For your throne is a throne of love, your reign is a reign of truth. In truth, you are judge and plaintiff, counselor and witness. You inscribe and seal, you record and recount. You remember all that has been forgotten. And when you open the book of memories, it speaks for itself. For every human hand leaves its mark, an imprint like no other. And so a great shofar will cry, Tikvah. A still small voice will be heard. Angels in a whirl of fear and trembling will say, behold the day of judgment, for they too are judged. In your eyes, even they are not blameless. All who come into the world pass before you like sheep before their shepherd, as a shepherd considers the flock when it passes beneath the staff. You count and consider every life. You set bounds, you decide destiny, you inscribe judgments. Page 178.
Rosh Hashanah, Yikatevon, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Yechatemon, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Yechatemon. Kama yavorun vechama yivarehun, Mikyeo mi amor, mi v'kitzor, mi v'eish, mi v'mayim. Rosh Hashanah, Yikatevon, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Yechatemon, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Yechatemon. Mi v'cherevu, mi v'chaya, mi v'ravu, mi v'tzama, mi v'rashuk, mi v'magefa, mi v'chanika, mi v'skila. Rosh Hashanah, Yikatevon, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Yechatemon, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Uvyom Tzom Kippur, Yechatemon. Mianuch, umianuch, מי ישרת ומי יתייסר, מי העני ומי העשיר, מי יושפע ומי ירום.
On Rosh Hashanah, this is written, and on the fast of Yom Kippur, this is sealed. How many will pass away from this world, and how many will be born into it? Who will live and who will die? Who will reach the ripeness of age? Who will be taken before their time? Who by fire and who by water? Who by war and who by beast? Who by famine and who by drought? Who by earthquake and who by plague? Who by strangling and who by stoning? Who will rest and who will wander? Who will be tranquil and who will be troubled? Who will be calm and who tormented? Who will live in poverty and who in prosperity? Who will be humbled and who exalted? Together we read on the top of the next page. But through return to the right path, through prayer and righteous giving, we can transcend the harshness of the decree.
Uteshuva, utefila, utzedaga, mavirin et roa agezera.
We who are mortal, our origin is dust, and so is our end. We wear out our lives to get our bread, like broken vessels, like withered grass, like a flower that must fade, a shadow moving on, a cloud passing by, mere dust on the wind, a dream that flies away. But for you, ever-living sovereign, time has no limits. Your presence, unbounded by days and years, is everywhere, a glorious mystery none can decipher. Your name is worthy of you, and you are worthy of your name. And our name you have linked with yours. Page 184, please rise.
Nekadesh, Nekadesh, Nekadesh et Shimcha b'olam, Nekadesh et Shimcha b'olam, Geshem shemakdishim oto b'shmei maron. Gakatuv ayar neviecha v'karezeza ve'amar. Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzevaot, melech haaretz kivod. לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד God לך, לדור ודור, לדור ודור, לדור ודור נגיד God לך, ולנצח נצחים קדושתך נקדיש, קדושתך נקדיש, ושבחך אלוהינו מפינו לא ימוש, לא ימוש לעולם אמן. כי אל מלך אדום וקדוש אתה.
Baruch atah Adonai HaMelech HaKadosh. Continue with the great Aleinu on page 202. We remain standing before our open ark. Page 223. Avinu Malkeinu, Shema Kolenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Almighty and merciful, hear our voice. Avinu Malkeinu, Chatanu Lefanecha.
Avinu Malkeinu, we have strayed and sinned before you.
Avinu Malkeinu, Chamol Aleinu V'ol Aleinu V'Tapenu.
Avinu Malkeinu, have compassion on us and our families.
Avinu Malkeinu, Kale Dever V'cherev V'ra'av Me'aleinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, halt the onslaught of sickness, violence, and hunger.
Avinu Malkeinu, Kale Kol Tsar Umastin Me'aleinu.
Avinu Malkeinu, halt the reign of those who cause pain and terror.
Avinu Malkeinu, Kodvenu B'Sefer Chaim Tovim.
Avinu Malkeinu, enter our names in the book of lives well lived.
Avinu Malkeinu, Chadesh Aleinu Shana Tova.
Avinu Malkeinu, renew for us a year of goodness.
Avinu Malkeinu, Chonenu V'Anenu Ki Ein Banu Ma'asim. Aseh Imanu Tzedakah V'Chesed V'Hoshienu.
Avinu Malkeinu, almighty and merciful, answer us with grace, for our deeds are wanting. Save us through acts of justice and love.
Avinu Malkeinu, Konenu Vanenu. Avinu Malkeinu, Konenu Vanenu, Ki Ein Banu Ma'asim. Aseh Imanu, Tzedakah.
Please be seated. I'd like to take a moment to study a little Torah together now. And yesterday, for those of you who are attending, you will remember that we read a very interesting Haftarah portion about the story of Hannah, in the period immediately starting the kings, the period of the kings of Israel. And it was a very brief encounter with the Haftarah that really deserves a little more of a deep dive. So today we're going to get a chance to do some of that deep dive. We'll study a little bit of Torah together. We'll open up the space for a little bit of conversation, and hopefully we'll understand this important story that sometimes is glossed over on a little bit of a deeper level. So right now, for those of us who are in person, Kim is coming by, and thank you very much, Kim, for passing out those study sheets. I will be screen sharing the study sheet for all those who are participating on Zoom. It's good to see all of you. That's why I've got my computer here. And we can start with a blessing for Torah study. It's the familiar blessing, Tzivanu, formulation, and ends La'asok b'divrei Torah. Thank you, God, for the gift to engage in Torah study together. So please join together at La'asok b'divrei Torah. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So as I mentioned, this story takes place toward the end of the period of the judges, before the period of the kings begins. And as such, there is not yet a centralized location of worship in Jerusalem, which only happens in the David era, but rather there are different sites where Israelite pilgrims would go to worship during the holidays, to bring their offerings, to offer sacrifices, and to generally join the festivity of those holiday celebrations. And so here the story begins with a man named Elkanah, who had two wives, Hannah and Peninnah. Feel free to follow along here. There was a man named Elkanah. He had two wives. The name of one was Hannah and the name of the other Peninnah. Peninnah had children, but Hannah had no children. Now this man used to go up year by year from his town to worship God and to sacrifice to the Eternal of hosts at Shiloh, which by the way was in the northern, what later became the northern kingdom. where the two sons of Eli, Hophni and Pinchas, were priests of the Eternal. On the day when Elkanah sacrificed, he would give portions to his wife Peninnah and to all her sons and daughters. But to Hannah he gave a double portion because he loved her, Gesundheit. But the Eternal had closed her womb. Her rival used to provoke her severely to irritate her because the Eternal had closed her womb. So it went on year by year. As often as she went up to the house of the Eternal, she used to provoke her. Therefore, Hannah wept and would not eat. Her husband Elkanah said to her, Hannah, why do you weep? Why do you not eat? Why is your heart sad? Am I not more dear to you than 10 sons? I have a feeling that his comment did not achieve the intended goal. After they had eaten and drunk at Shiloh, I'm on verse 9, second paragraph, Hannah rose and presented herself before the Eternal. Eli, the priest, was sitting on the seat beside the doorpost of the temple of the Eternal. Hannah was deeply distressed and prayed to God and wept bitterly. She made this vow, O Eternal of hosts, if only you will look on the misery of your servant and remember me and not forget your servant, but will give to your servant a male child, then I will set him before you as a Nazirite until the day of his death. He shall drink neither wine nor intoxicants, and no razor shall touch his head. As she continued praying before the Eternal, Eli the priest observed her mouth. Hannah was praying silently, only her lips moved, but her voice was not heard. Therefore Eli thought she was drunk. So Eli said to her, how long will you make a drunken spectacle of yourself? Put away your wine. But Hannah answered, no, my lord, I am a woman deeply troubled. I have drunk neither wine nor strong drink, but I have been pouring out my soul before the Eternal. Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman, for I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and vexation all this time. Then Eli answered, go in peace. The God of Israel grant the petition you have made of him. And if you continue reading in the first book of Samuel, chapters 1 and 2, you'll see that Hannah's prayer is in fact answered. After her many years of distress and hope, she gives birth to a son. The son is named Samuel, and Samuel becomes a prophet who will be a mentor and anointer, the official approval of kings yet to come. And so his story becomes very important, and it starts with hers. And we look at this story on a few different levels. On the one hand, we can look at this story as an individual woman's struggle. So one direction to take the conversation is the struggle for fertility and feeling unseen in that. On another level, this is a family dynamic story, the complexity between Hannah and her rival wife, Peninnah, and her husband who loves her but seems fairly oblivious and seems to do exactly the wrong thing, even though he wants to do the right thing. And on yet another level, we can read this story as an explanation of prayer, because what Hannah is doing is incredibly unusual. It doesn't seem so surprising to us today that somebody would go into a temple to pray, perhaps extemporaneously, perhaps silently in a moment of privacy in the sanctuary. But in these days, there was no such thing as communal prayer in a temple. The temple was there for one purpose only, and that purpose was for sacrifices. And so she is undermining in a certain way the decorum of the environment where she lives, and she is starting something new, which is one reason that the rabbis in the Talmud will look back and praise her as the originator of personal prayer. She becomes a stepping stone in their later imagination for the transition from animal sacrifice, as I referred to earlier in the service, to the sacrifice of the lips, the family home as the altar, and the communal sacrifice being prayer. But although we could look at all three of these dimensions, I actually want to focus on yet a fourth dimension, which is the power that she wields to upend a status quo, to be a bridge to something different. If you look at the Talmud on the following page, you have a later source, perhaps 600-700 years codified after this story, in which the rabbis of the Talmud are discussing Hannah. And they're actually going to add her to a list of prophets, believe it or not. She gets to be listed with such notables as Isaiah and Jeremiah, and here Elijah. In Tractate Brachot, Rabbi Elazar said, Hannah spoke audaciously toward heaven, as it says in the text that we just read, and Hannah prayed to the Eternal. This teaches that she spoke insolently toward heaven. Why do they assume this is the case? Because the Hebrew is v'titpalel al Adonai, which is a strange formulation. It means she prayed upon God, instead of maybe what we would expect. She prayed to God. So the rabbis read this strange verse from the Hannah story and say she must have been insolent toward God. Literally, hiticha devarim. She threw words back at God. I don't know about you, but I'm looking at this story and it doesn't seem that she's exactly speaking insolently toward God. She's pouring out her heart and soul and asking God for something, but not necessarily insolently. Nevertheless, the rabbis will fill in the blank and say, in words that we don't read in this story, Hannah went to God and said, God, you've given me this body. You've given me breasts that I may have a child and nurse that child to health. And yet you refuse to give me the gift of motherhood, which is one of my life's purposes. The rabbis will compare that sort of argument against God, that prophetic instinct, to Elijah the prophet. As we continue, Rabbi Elazar also said, Elijah also spoke audaciously toward heaven. So Hannah is speaking audaciously toward God, and she's also speaking audaciously with chutzpah toward Eli the priest, who of course symbolizes the status quo, symbolizes the way things are in the temple and the sacrifices in those days. In the second text, we see Ula, or some say Rabbi Yossi ben Chanina, this is the second paragraph of the Talmud, that when Hannah protested, no, my Lord, in other words, she says to Eli, no, I'm not drunk. Don't assume that I'm drunk. What she really meant was, you are no Lord in this matter. The Holy Spirit does not rest upon you. Pretty bold, right? What do you think about the character of Hannah? What is she demonstrating in her righteous protest? What do you think? I'll open up this question to anybody, and you can enter into the chat what you think, or if you want, you can raise your hand and we can have a little conversation. So what do you read here in the character of Hannah? What are her attributes that you recognize? And we can open it up to anybody here or also on Zoom. Is there anything here that we can identify with? Stu says she was bold. Okay. That's definitely true. Lauren in person. Yes.
I also think she was acting out of envy. Because she didn't want her husband to give her something for nothing. She was envious of Penina and wanted all that conveyed.
So Lauren says that another motivation might be envy, that she was jealous of Penina, her rival wife, and perhaps wanted what Penina had, but she could not have. All right, other perspectives? Okay, I'm seeing a lot of comments here in the chat. Strong, independent, clear-thinking woman. Female rebellion against the status quo. She was fed up, sick, and tired of being taunted. Apologies that those in person cannot see what's in the chat, so I'm reading them to you, and those in the chat cannot see what's going on in person, so I'm saying them to you, and it's all hopefully working out. Okay, yes, she was understandably sick of being taunted. And John says, comparing her behavior to that of Sarah, Hannah does not demand from Elkanah to expel Penina from the household. So that's an interesting comparison with the text that we read yesterday of Hagar and Ishmael. So she's perhaps, John says, taking a more ethical route. So perhaps she does feel bitter. I mean, it would be understood that she does, but she's not taking it out on Penina per se. She's trying to take her destiny into her own hands. Joel says she was honest and open, having faith in God. Exactly.
Also saying that she's now promising if God will at least give her a male child,
Mhm.
she's willing to give that child up immediately without even seeing it or holding it, knowing that at least that will fulfill something of promise. She's promising one thing, looking for something else.
Right, right. Well said, Eli. So she's actually looking for a child, but not for herself, at least not in the sense of being able to keep that child, because she promises to give this child as a Nazarite to God, meaning that this child is going to be dedicated as a priest who will serve God in a unique way, who will have a unique role, who will be elevated for a purpose Hannah seems to know, beyond just what any other first son might do. All right. Sarah says this is a feminist rebellion, and yet so ironic. She rebels because she is upset that she can't play her traditional role of mother. Yes, isn't that interestingly conflictual? Do you think, Sarah, or anybody, that she resents not being able to play the role of mother in the more traditional sense? It seems her focus seems in the text to be pretty laser sharp here, right? But it certainly raises the question of her emotional state concerning that choice. It's a good point to raise. I see a hand. Ellen, would you like to unmute yourself and participate in the discussion?
Yeah, it seems to me also that it's a possibility that she wanted to one up the other competing wife, that she wasn't going to have just a regular child. She was going to have a child dedicated. And I think that it may be all she wanted to do. She wanted to stop the suffering that the other wife caused her.
Right. So Ellen seems to be supporting the line of thinking that there is a rivalry and a motivation in that sense as well. Although interestingly, that's not in the text, right? It doesn't say, we only assume that that's the case, which is understood because, you know, as Robert Alter, the great Bible scholar, says, some of you know I'm a fan of this phrase, that the Bible is a sparse foreground with a vast background. So one can only imagine the conversations and the feelings exchanged between Hannah and Peninnah so many times. See a couple other comments coming in here. Ellen and Howie say she asked directly for what she wanted. Yeah, can't argue with that. She trusted, says April, her relationship and faith with God and asked for what she wanted directly and prayed to God. Right, and she prayed to God, as we've discussed a little bit, in complete defiance of the norms going on around her. Right, let's just talk about this for a second. What is the significance, do you think, of the location of that demand? She could have had this prayer in privacy of her own home. She could have taken a moment apart from the crowd while they were all on their pilgrimage, gone out into a field and had a moment to herself. Yet she chooses to very boldly, as a woman, go in a place where the men have responsibility, to, as a non-mother, ask to be made a mother. Being a woman without being a mother is a position of even less status in this society. And she chooses to do it in a way that is completely contrary to anything that happens in this world. There is no prayer in sanctuaries at this point. So, Lauren?
Well, but she's also gone to the place where men traditionally make sacrifices. And since she's chattel herself, she owns nothing to sacrifice. The only thing that she can sacrifice is the gift of her child, if God hears her voice.
Mm-hmm. So Lauren says that she goes to the place where sacrifices happen to make the sacrifice, the only possible sacrifice, perhaps, that she as a woman can make.
Well, in that regard, the sacrifice is followed by a feast, meal, or whatever. Anita gets all the stuff for all her kids, Anna gets 10 times as much or whatever, and basically says, I'm going back to the kitchen to say, no, thank you, I want something else.
Right, right. So there is that on a literary level, Eli, thank you for pointing that out. There's very much this sense of the material satiation that she experiences, nevertheless leaving a huge hole in a spiritual sense, which I actually had never thought about before, but that is very much part of the story. So that's wisely said. Let's take a look for a second here at the way that a scholar understands this story in its Jewish time. And I think that's going to reflect both on the role it's playing within the Torah and also on the character of Hannah. So I invite us to read this together. This is the middle paragraph on the second page of your handout. Rabbi Rachel Adler, who's a teacher at HUC in LA, says only the Hannah narrative addresses the particular concerns of the rabbis about the nature and authenticity of rabbinic prayer. This narrative is the only instance recorded in the Bible in which a private individual prays in a sanctuary where sacrifices are offered. As such, it affirms for rabbinic Judaism its own continuity with tradition, the continuity between prayer and sacrifice, ritual word and ritual deed, between the synagogue liturgies and the ancient rites of the tabernacle and temple. In the person of Hannah confronting the high priest Eli, moreover, rabbinic Judaism confronts the Judaism of the temple cult. To the imagined priestly challenge, do you call this unprecedented behavior worship? Isn't this sacrilege? Rabbinic Judaism responds with its exegesis on Hannah's defiant, "No, my Lord." So just take a moment to reread that for yourself. She's saying a lot here. She's explaining in a way why the rabbis are such a fan of what Hannah is doing here. The rabbis hold Hannah up actually as the exemplar of the perfect way to pray the Shemona Esrei. They say you're supposed to do it humbly, not too loud so that you're not interrupting anybody else's prayer. And they say that you're supposed to do it with a pure heart and not being drunk, which Hannah is not, which they use in this story. And they go on in a few other ways to describe how Hannah is the exemplar here. Because for them, the rabbis actually need a revolution in order to understand the validity of their own project, right? They need rabbinic Judaism to stand for something that is at once both continuous with and also somehow completely different from that which came before. It's hard for us to imagine, I think, many of us having grown up going to synagogue and having services and not ever really, farming to give sacrifices at the pilgrimage festivals, although I know some of us do have farms and do give. But nevertheless, it's not a part of most of our experience. And so it's hard for us to imagine just the paradigm shift that is involved in the transition from a sacrificial Judaism into a Judaism of the sacrifice of the heart, of a relationship to God, which is more transactional with objects and animals and smells and sights and blood. And it's very visceral, to an ethical monotheism where God is present, we hope, but in the background in many ways. And our relationship with God is not so tangible. That is a very difficult transition to accomplish. And it requires a strong character who can challenge authority and challenge the status quo. So I will leave us with this question of, in what ways is our world today, in what way are our lives in a status quo that needs to be challenged? Are we seeing a paradigm shift in anything? I mentioned in my Rosh Hashanah evening sermon that I think that when we drive by temple and when we look at this pandemic and the progress we're making or not making, it's one reason it's so difficult is because we are in a time of transformation. And it's very difficult to see ourselves as Hannah, right? Who has the wherewithal to completely imagine a totally new way of doing things, a great risk to herself, her embarrassment, her status, her family's reputation, but nevertheless to see that actually the future is what I will make of it. So my question for us, and maybe this is where we can end today, is this year, what audacious new thinking do we need to bring into our lives that signals a shift to something new? What is the future going to hold for ourselves, our families, our community, And how can we have the courage to sometimes stand up to authority, whomever it is, and say, wait a second, something new is about to be born. I think that we have a role to play in making that happen, and it's going to require a little bit of risk. All of these paradigm shifts in Judaism have required Hannahs, have required prophets, have required that risk. And I think that is our role as well. So I wanted to thank you all for participating in our Torah study today. And I realize it wasn't always easy to hear those in person if you're on Zoom, or to see those on Zoom if you're in person, but we nevertheless succeeded in having a conversation. And I hope that you'll take these thought questions at the bottom of your handout, which we can also provide afterwards to those experiencing digitally, and perhaps have a little conversation over lunch to talk about the way that change happens, because this certainly will be a year of change for all of us. We'll now continue with our Torah service and study yet different stories from our tradition, beginning on page, I believe it's no, that's not the right page. 227. 227, please rise.
Ein kamocha Elohim Adonai, ve'ein kema'asecha, malchutecha malchut kol olamim, u'memshaltecha bechol dor v'dor. Adonai melech, Adonai malach, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Adonai hos le'amo yiteh. Adonai yevarech et amo v'shalom. Aharim Eitiva v'yirtzon ha'et Zion. Tivna homot Yerushalayim. Tivna homot Yerushalayim.
Adonai, Adonai, God, compassionate, gracious, endlessly patient, loving, and true, showing mercy to the 1,000th generation, forgiving evil, defiance, and wrongdoing, granting pardon.
Adonai, Adonai, El Rahum V'Hanun, Erech Habayim, Merav Chesed V'Emet, Notzer Chesed La'olamim, Nosei Avon V'Chesed V'Chata V'Nakem. Adonai, Adonai, El Rahum V'Hanun, Erech Habayim, Merav Chesed V'Emet, Notzer Chesed La'olamim, Nosei Avon V'Chesed V'Chata V'Nakem. Adonai, Adonai, El Rahum V'Hanun, Erech Habayim, Merav Chesed V'Emet, Notzer Chesed La'olamim, Nosei Avon V'Chesed V'Chata V'Nakem. Shema Yisrael,
ve'amo, Yifol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz, Yifol b'shamayim u'ba'aretz. Lecha Adonai ha'melacha, ve'ani Hashem echol yerosh.
Please be seated. We're going to be reading the traditional second day Rosh Hashanah reading, the Akedah, one of the most challenging stories, I think, in the Torah, the story of the binding of Isaac. And I'd like to share this teaching brought by Elie Wiesel, who writes that stories like this challenge us, so it is our responsibility to, quote, challenge the text right back, to demand that it, quote, live up to our ethical instincts. Wiesel teaches that faith must never be a weapon against human beings, but it can be used as a weapon against God for the sake of God. He reads this particular story through a mystical lens that views Torah as black fire on white fire, black on white. The white fire, he teaches, the background in the scroll behind the text, is the territory of moral intuition, the place where our deep sense of rightness takes root. We must fill in the context. Our job, he says, is to write our questions, our commentary in white fire on black fire. And when we read stories like this, it's hard not to have those questions. According to Wiesel, Abraham's acquiescence to God's command to sacrifice his son Isaac is in fact an act of protest, as though Abraham has said back to God when God instructs him to sacrifice his son, I defy you, God, I shall submit to your will, but let us see whether you shall go to the end, whether you shall remain passive and silent when the life of my son, who is also your son, is at stake. Of course, you might think that reading the text this way is a little bit of a stretch. It may be more obvious, a more easy explanation to just say that Abraham has failed this particular test, one of the traditional 10 tests of Abraham, even though he had passed it earlier at Sodom and Gomorrah when he righteously rebelled and argued against God, trying to save the city. But in Elie Wiesel's way of understanding this story, God changes God's mind and relents. And so perhaps the role of Abraham, as of any person of faith, is to speak against God in a contest of ethics. A contest of ethics. As we read the words this morning of the Akedah, let the silences cry out in that contest of ethics. Let Sarah's unheard wailing grip you. Let Isaac's pleading eyes stir your heart. Let Abraham's silence disquiet you. For in the end, there are no answers, only a silent invitation back to the depths of the human struggle. If you wish to follow along with the Torah reading, the English and Hebrew can be found on pages 240 and 241 in your Machzor. And we are lucky to have a few Torah honorees here in person, including our first reader, Ken Rosenberg. We invite you up. All of us up here will stay masked. And for the first Aliyah, we invite Shali Kaposi. Ta'amod, Shoshana Zoheret, Bat Esther, Bat Sarah Esther, Ve'aba Mendela Aliyah Harishona. You all set over there? All right.
Baruch hu et Adonai HaMevorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech ha'olam. Asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim. V'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen. Amen. Vayehi achar hadvarim ha'ele v'ha Elohim nisa et Avraham vayomer elav Avraham vayomer hineni vayomer kachna et bincha et yechidecha asher ahavta et Yitzchak v'lech lecha el eretz haMoriah v'ha'alehu sham le'olah al achad ha'arim asher Omar Elecha. Vayashkem Avraham Baboker. Vayachavosh Echamoro. Vayikach et Shnei Arav Ito. Ve'e Yitzchak Beno. Vayavakar Etzi Olah. Vayakam vayelech al hamakom asher amar lo Elohim. Vayom hashlishi vayisa Avraham et einav vayared hamakom merachot. Vayomer Avraham el Arav shavu lechem po im hachamor ve'ani ve'hanar ne'achai ad ko v'nishtachaveh v'nashuva aleichem vayikach Avraham et eitzei ha'olah Vayasam al Yitzchak beno, vayikach biyado, et ha'esh for et ha'ma'achelet, v'yalchu shnehem yachdov. Vayomer Yitzchak el Avraham aviv, vayomer aviv, vayomer hineni v'ni. Vayomer hinei ha'esh v'ha'etzim v'ayeh haseh le'olah. Vayomer Avraham Elohim Yir'elo asa le'olah b'ni Vayechu shnehem yachdov.
Baruch Ata Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chaye olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch Ata Adonai Noten HaTorah.
Amen.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So those first 8 verses are what Ken read so beautifully. And it was after these events, that God put Abraham to the test. And God said to him, Abraham, and he said, here I am. And God said, come, take your son, your only one whom you love, Isaac, go forth to the land of Moriah to offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I will show you. And Abraham arose early in the morning and harnessed his donkey and took with him 2 young servants and his son Isaac. And he split the burnt offering wood and rose and departed for the place that God had said to him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted his eyes and saw the place in the distance. And Abraham said to his young servants, you stay here with the donkey, while the boy and I go further on. We will worship and return to you. And Abraham took the burnt offering wood and placed it on his son Isaac, and took in his own hand the firestone and the knife, and the 2 of them walked together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, he said, my father. And he said, here I am, my son. And he said back, here is the firestone, and here is the wood, but where is the sheep for the burnt offering? And Abraham said, God will see to the sheep for a burnt offering, my son. And the 2 of them walked on together. Ken will stay to read verses 9 through 14. And for the second Aliyah, we'll invite Lauren Sturman to the front. Ta'amor Leah bat Avram v'Chana la'Aliyah hashniya.
Baruch atah Adonai. Baruch atah Adonai hambarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hambarach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai hambarach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Amen. Vayavohu el hamakom asher amar lo Elohim. Vayiven sham Avraham el hamizpeah vayarok el ha'etzim vayakor et Yitzchak beno Vayasem oto al hamizpeah bima la'etzim. Vayishlach Avraham et yado vayikach et hama'achelet lishchok et beno. Vayikra elav malach Adonai min hashamayim vayomer Avraham, vayomer hineni, vayomer al tishlach yadcha el na'ar, ve'al ta'as lo me'uma, ki ata yadati, ki yirei Elohim ata, v'lo chasavta, et bincha et yechidecha mimeni. Vayisa Avraham et einav, vayar vahine ayo achar, ye'eflash pachfach bekarnav. Vayelech Avraham, vayikach et ha'ayo, vayalehu le'olah, tachach beno. Vayikra Avraham, Shem ha'makom ha'hu, Adonai yireh, asher ye'amer hayom, v'har Adonai yireh.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torah temet v'chaye olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Ken, thank you very much. Beautifully read, beautifully read. We'll see you in a little bit. Okay, so lift, right? Okay.
And Abraham and Isaac came to the place that God had said to him. And there Abraham built an altar and arranged the wood and bound his son Isaac, placed him on the altar over the wood. And Abraham stretched out his hand and took the knife to slay his son. But a messenger of Adonai came to him, called from heaven, saying, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. And the messenger said, Do not lay your hand on the boy. Do nothing to him. For now I know you are in awe of God, since you would not deny me your son, your beloved one. And Abraham lifted his eyes, and suddenly he saw in the thicket a ram caught by its horns. And Abraham took the ram and offered it as a burnt offering in place of his son. And Abraham called that place by the name Adonai Yireh. Adonai will see, as it is said to this day, on the mountain of Adonai there is seeing. Our third Torah reader is Cantor Boyle. And for the third Aliyah, I think you're going to like this one. We invite Corey Guzzi up to the Torah. Ya'amod Mordechai Chaim ben Abraham Besar al Aliyah HaShelishit. Man, I got a cheat sheet for you if you want. Cheat sheet, if that's helpful. I think I'm going to go by the book, if that's okay.
Baruch hu et Adonai Hamvorach.
Baruch Adonai HaMevorach le'olam va'ed.
Baruch Adonai Hamvorach le'olam va'ed. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim v'natan lanu et Torato. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen.
Vayikra malach Adonai el Abraham she'ir bin hashamayim vayomer binishpati ne'um Adonai yan asher asita et hadavar hazeh velo chasachta et bincha et yechidecha Kivarech avarechecha veharba arbe et zarecha v'chochvei hashamayim v'chachom asher al sfat hayam vayirash zarecha beit sha'ar oyevav v'hitbarechu v'zarecha kol goyei haaretz ekel Asher shamatam b'koli vayashov Abraham el na'arav vayakumu vayalchu yachdav el be'er shava vayeshev Abraham b'be'er shava.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher natan lanu Torat emet v'chaye olam nata b'tochenu. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah.
Amen. Yashikoah. And a messenger of Adonai called to Abraham from heaven a second time and said, By myself I swear, declares Adonai, that because you have acted thus and would not deny me your son, your only one, I will bless you greatly. I will multiply your seed like the stars in the sky and like sand by the sea. Your seed shall possess the gate of its foes, and all the earth's nations shall be blessed through your seed because you hearken to my voice. And Abraham returned to his young servants, and they rose, and together they walked to Beersheba, and Abraham dwelt in Beersheba. In the presence of our Torah scroll, we'll offer a Misha Beirach for healing. Page 244. Misha Beirach avotenu v'imotenu Avraham Yitzchak v'Yaakov Sar Rivka Rachel v'Leah v'yivarech v'yirapeh et kol hacholim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Yamalei Rachamim Aleihem Lachalimam L'Rapotam L'Achazikam V'Lachayotam V'Yishlach Lehem Mehira Refuah Shlema B'toch Shar HaCholim Refuat HaNefesh Refuat HaGuf Hashta B'Agala V'Zman Kariv V'Nomar Amen.
The ones before us, help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
I'd like to take a brief moment to bring to mind the state of Israel and offer a blessing for its peace and prosperity. Please turn to page 274. I invite you to join in the English together from home or here after I read the Hebrew. Avinu shebashamayim, tzur Yisrael v'goalo, borech et medinat Yisrael, reshit tzmichat geulatenu. Again aleha be'evrat chastecha, ufros aleha sukat shlomecha, ushlach orcha v'amitcha l'rasheha tzarea v'yoatzeha. V'takneim be'etzah tova milfanecha, chazek et yedei mignei eretz kodshenu. V'hanchilem Eloheinu Yeshua, v'ateret nitzchon ta'atrem. V'natata shalom ba'aretz v'zimchat olam leyoshveha v'nomar Amen. Together, Avinu, you who are high above all nations, states, and peoples, Rock of Israel, the one who has saved us and preserved us in life. Bless the state of Israel, first flowering of our redemption. Be her loving shield, a shelter of lasting peace. Guide her leaders and advisors by your light of truth. Instruct them with your good counsel. Strengthen the hands of those who build and protect our holy land. Deliver them from danger. Crown their efforts with success. Grant peace to the land, lasting joy to all her people. As together we say, Amen. For the lifting and dressing of the Torah, we'll invite Ken back up and Andrea San Marco to help us dress. Invite everybody, please, to rise. Bezot HaTorah asher sam Moshe lifnei bnei Yisrael al pi Adonai v'yad Moshe.
Nope, you're off the top. Excellent. We just need the pointer. We can have a seat.
This morning's Haftarah comes from the prophet Jeremiah, who conveys a hope for the restoration of the people of Israel. We can read this from chapter 31 as a hope for physical restoration from exiles back to our land, or as a spiritual reconciliation of sorts, in keeping with the motifs of the high holidays. Continuing the Rosh Hashanah theme of hopeful mothers, we have already encountered many of them, right? Sarah, Hagar, Hannah. This prophetic passage invokes the metaphor of Rachel crying for her children who have gone into exile. Through her tears, she yearns for them to return home, just as the Jewish people yearn to come home to their homelands and have yearned for that from their place in exile over the course of many millennia. The Haftarah may be found on page 250, and we invite Rabbi Susan Landau-Moss to read it.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher bachar b'nim tovim v'ratzav v'divreihem hanemarim be'emet. Baruch atah Adonai habocher b'torah u'Moshe avdo U'Yisrael amo miniyeh ha'emet v'tzedek.
Amen.
Ko amar Adonai matzah chen bamidbar am sridei charev haloch lehargio Yisrael. Merachok Adonai nirali me'avat olam avtich al kein mishakti chased od evnech v'nivneit betulat Yisrael od tadi tu paich ve'yatzat imcho mesachakim od tadich ramim beharei shomron natu notim bechilevu ki yesh yom karu notzrim behar Ephraim kumu v'na'alei Zion el Adonai Eloheinu. Hicho amar Adonai ronu li'Yaakov simcha v'tzahalu berosh hagoyim hashmiu hallelu ve'imru hosha Adonai et amecha et sherit Yisrael. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam tzor kol haolamim tzadik b'chol hadorot ha'el hane'eman ha'omer ve'oseh hamdaber mekayim shekol devarav emet v'tzedek
Ne'eman atahu Adonai Eloheinu v'ne'emanim devarecha v'davar echad midvarecha achor lo yashuv rekam ki el melech ne'eman v'rachaman ata baruch ata Adonai ha'el ha'ne'eman v'chol devarav Rachem al Tzion ki hi beit chayenu v'la'alu bat nefesh toshia b'mheira b'yameinu baruch ata Adonai v'samech Tzion b'vaneha Samcheinu Adonai Eloheinu b'Eliyahu hanavi avdacha uv'malchut beit David meshichacha b'mheira yavo v'yagel libeinu Al kiso lo yeshav zar v'lo yinchalu od acherim et kevodo ki v'shem kodshecha nishbata lo shelo yichben nero leolam va'ed baruch ata Adonai magein David
Amen.
Al Torah v'al avodah v'al hanavim v'al yom hazikaron hazeh Shanatata lanu Adonai Eloheinu lechavod v'tifaret al hakol Adonai Eloheinu anachnu modim lach u'mvarchim otach Yiparach shimcha befi kol chai tamid leolam va'ed u'dvar emet v'kayam la'ad baruch ata Adonai melech al kol haaretz mekadesh Yisrael v'yom hazikaron
Amen. Hashpah. We'll now return the Torah to the Ark, so I invite you all to please rise. We're on page 277.
Behold, I have given you this teaching, my Torah. Do not desert it.
Oftentimes when we encounter the symbol of the shofar throughout the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, it has to do with two things: coronation ceremonies for kings or announcing war. The symbolism of the shofar in the service tends to prefer coronating God as king, as sovereign on these days. And with regard to the tradition of war, the medieval commentator Nachmanides reads the war cry in one of the prophetic books, the war cry of the shofar, and says, Truat milchama, no, it's not a cry out for war, it's a truat chesed, it's a cry out for mercy. So I hope that when we hear these shrill notes that bring us to attention, maybe give us a little bit of momentary distress, they'll remind us that we're not being called to battle, but rather being called to open our hearts and bring a little more chesed, a little more loving kindness into the world. Shofar service is on page 284.
Baruch atah Adonai, shomei kol truat amo Yisrael, merachamim.
Blessed are you in our lives, Adonai. You hear with love the shofar, the true voice of your people, Israel.
Tekiah. Shvarim Torah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah Gedolah. Reshet Sifateinu Yerov Lefanecha Aram Benisah. Reshet Sifateinu Yerov Lefanecha Aram Benisah.
There's a tradition to sound at least 100 notes at Rosh Hashanah on the shofar. And I think between yesterday's service with our two blowers and our wonderful teen who blew at our family service, Devri, and our tashlich, we're at about 86. So Eli has very graciously agreed to give us one final set of calls for the day. Tekiah. Shvarim Truah. Tekiah. Tekiah. Shvarim. Tekiah. Tekiah. Teruah. Tekiah Gedolah. Yasher Koach. We can have a seat. Reshet Sifateinu Yerov Lefanecha Aram Benisah. Reshet Sifateinu Yerov Lefanecha Aram Benisah. We turn our hearts now to those who have left this world as we enter the mourner's Kaddish, and we say we will remember them. Eila es kara, these do I remember. Faces that are gone, somebody's child, somebody's sweetheart, somebody's friend. Eyes and hands, a hug or a smile that somebody cherished. Precious to you or precious to me, precious to our people, all gone now except in memory. But as a candle flames out of the dark, our memories surge up sometimes almost as out of nowhere. And suddenly they're right there with us again. They're with us today, the faces that are gone. For their sake and ours, we remember what it's like to lose someone. And we make a promise, Eila es kara, these will I remember. Mourner's Kaddish is on page 292. Please rise if it's comfortable to do so. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma divrach yireutei, v'yamlich malchutei, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon, u'v'chayei d'chol beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'v'zman kariv v'imru. Amen. Yehei shmei rabbah mevorach le'alam u'le'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yinaseh. V'yit hadar, v'yit alev, v'yit halal, shemei d'kudesha b'richu. Le'ela u'le'ela mikol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechamata, da'amiran be'alma v'yimru. Amen. Yehei shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chayim aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, v'yimru. Amen. Oseh shalom b'imromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, Aleinu ve'al kol Yisrael, ve'al kol yoshvei tevel, v'imru. Amen. May the source of comfort bring peace into our world and give peace to those who are in grief on this day as we say together, Amen. Please be seated. Such a joy to be able to celebrate together with those who are remote, with those who are in person. We certainly are grateful to all those who prepared Torah honors today, and for Eli, our shofar blower. Thank you very much. I'd like to say a special thank you to Cantor and to Walter for the beautiful music, and for, of course, our TBT choir, who we look forward to hearing from again on Kol Nidre. Thank you very much to our technology team, including a couple folks here, Corey especially, and Susie, and Haida and Don and Stu helping out, and whoever else has been greeting and welcoming behind the scenes in the Zoom. We certainly appreciate all of that you're doing to make our community be able to access with ease this service this year. We do have another service coming up in just 2 days. It's Shabbat. Believe it or not, we continue to have Shabbat services. So we'll celebrate together Shabbat Shuvah, this intermediary Shabbat between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And we hope to be outside on the Madison Green, should the weather cooperate, this Friday night. And then we have Torah study on Saturday, as always. On Sunday, we have a memorial service at the TBT Cemetery in Clinton, which will be on Zoom and also in person, so you can access either way. When it comes to all of the links that you can join to access for Yom Kippur, you will be receiving those soon, so don't worry that you haven't gotten them yet. It will all be clear. And please do fill up those brown paper grocery bags full of food to bring back on September 20th when you return your high holiday machzors. Are there any other announcements that I forgot? Okay. Terrific. Well, in that case, we'll go to our closing song, Hayom Te'amtzenu. God, strengthen us this day. Lead us into the new year with a sense of hope and togetherness, page 294.
Hayom, hayom, hayom te'amseinu, hayom te'amseinu, amen. Hayom, hayom, hayom te'vareinu, te'vareinu, amen. Hayom, hayom te'gadaleinu, hayom Chaim Tovim. Amen. Hayom, hayom, tishma shavatenu, tishma shavatenu. Amen. Hayom titmechenu bepnim sirkeha, sirkeha. Amen. Hayom, hayom, titmechenu bepnim sirkeha. Amen.
Adonai oz le'amo yitain, Adonai varech et amo vashalom. God, you give your people strength. Please see us into this new year, 5782, with some peace and harmony and good times as a congregation and community in our future. Amen. Shana Tova.